Hello friends, this is Ralph, and in today's video I'm showing you how to use the Behringer 2600 synthesizer as a MIDI to CV gate interface, so stay tuned. The Behringer 2600 is not only a great synthesizer with a fantastic sound, but also a very versatile tool. I know there are dedicated MIDI to CV gate interfaces and converters available, but for the sake of discussion and to demonstrate what a great tool the Behringer 2600 synthesizer is, let's assume you have a digital audio workstation or a MIDI hardware controller, which allows only for MIDI connections, and a classic monophonic synthesizer, like in my case the Oberheim OB-1, which doesn't support any MIDI but only allows for CV gate connections. And now you want to connect your digital audio workstation or your MIDI hardware controller to the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer by just using the Behringer 2600 as a MIDI to CV gate interface. That process I'm going to show you in today's video. But before we go ahead, please make sure you also watch my other videos on the 2600 synthesizer. Give them a like, and also please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so yet. And now, without further ado, let's jump into today's tutorial. Alright friends, we are looking here at the Behringer 2600 Grey Mini. That's the sound coming from it. And let me switch the camera to the Oberheim OB-1 monophonic synthesizer. Alright, the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer doesn't have any MIDI. It's a classic monophonic synthesizer which was introduced to the market back in 1978. So, since the Oberheim OB-1 only has CV gate in and outputs, the question is how we can use the Behringer 2600 as a MIDI to CV gate interface to connect, let's say, a DAW, a digital audio workstation, to the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. So the first step is to connect the Behringer 2600 to a PC or Mac. For this, we're taking the USB port here on the Behringer 2600 and connect it to the USB port on the Mac or PC. In my case, I'm using a Macintosh computer using Logic Pro. I'm not going into detail here. That's the topic of another tutorial that I'm probably going to do. So, when you have made the connection between the Behringer 2600 to the PC or Mac via USB, the Behringer 2600 will show up as a USB MIDI device on your computer. Then the next step now is to make the CV gate connection to the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer, because the topic of this tutorial is how to use the Behringer 2600 synthesizer as a MIDI to CV gate interface. For that, we are moving to the keyboard portamento section here in the lower left corner of the Behringer 2600. Here we have a CV output. We take a cable, plug it here into the CV output slot, then we move over to the Oberheim OB-1 and plug this signal into the CV input slot. Then we take here the gate output on the Behringer 2600, plug in another cable and run the gate signal into the gate input of the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer. Let me put in a little disclaimer here. When you connect different synthesizers with each other that have a different gate control voltage, you should always proceed with caution. Read the manual and then proceed at your own risk. Of course, you can always use resistors and passive attenuators to attenuate the signal, but as I said before, read the manual and make sure and understand how your machines operate and work. In our case here, the Behringer 2600 has a 10 volt gate output. And here on the Oberheim OB-1, the manual says that the gate input requires a 5 volt gate. I stress the word again, requires. Okay, what I did, I measured the gate output of the Oberheim OB-1, and then I saw that it is a little above 10 volt. So I figured that it is okay to run a 10 volt gate signal into the Oberheim. So the 5 volt gate is actually the minimum that the Oberheim OB-1 requires to trigger the envelopes. And that's how I proceeded to make sure everything is working nicely and is compatible and okay. So now let's see what's happening here on the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer after we have made the CV gate connection from the Behringer 2600 to the OB-1. Here, when I play some keys on the keyboard, you hear that nothing is happening, because when I use the gate and CV inputs here on the OB-1 synthesizer, the keyboard is disabled. So for that, now I'm moving over to my DAW and press some keys here on the digital keyboard in Logic Pro. And that's the Oberheim OB-1 that you are hearing. Let me use another sound. Once again, another sound. Okay, and then we also have a look here at the Behringer 2600. For the moment, I have turned down the sound from on the Behringer 2600, and now I bring it up here in the mixer. And you hear both sounds, both synthesizers are playing at the same time. Once again, I want to tell you that I'm pressing some keys on the digital keyboard in Logic Pro. And now let's move on to the next thing. Suppose you want to connect a hardware MIDI sequencer to the Oberheim OB-1. Once again, you can use the Behringer 2600 as a MIDI to CV gate interface. To demonstrate this, we are going to use here the Arturia key step. We take the MIDI output here on the key step and plug it into the MIDI input here on the Behringer 2600. As you can see, we have here CV outputs, gate and CV pitch. Actually, we could make the CV gate connection directly from the Arturia key step to the Oberheim OB-1. But let's pretend the key step doesn't have any CV gate outputs. Then this concept applies to other hardware controllers that don't have any CV gate outputs. Alright, as you can see, the Behringer 2600 is a pretty useful tool when solving some connection issues. Please let me know in the comment section whether you are interested to see a complete overview video about the Oberheim OB-1 synthesizer. I've already made a video about the OB-1, actually about its filter. You can check it out up here, or I also put the link into the description of today's video. And now, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope I see you again in my next video. Until then, take care, stay safe, peace.